To be honest with you, we used to talk about it a lot, but most of the people my age are gone or moved away or dead,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And so most of the generation I grew up with is just or have moved away, and nothing is hardly ever said about it. I mean, and probably the history of the leper will die with us too.
It was a tragedy. It is. It's a very interesting story, and it's a tragedy. It's part of our history, though, and yeah, I'm reading now a story called "The Worst Hard Times," and it's about the Dust Bowl, surviving the Dust Bowl, and it's just it's amazing what the human species can endure in order to survive. Yeah. And I think George is just is an early 20th century example of that.
It says in this book, written by Frank Sacron, who was a brilliant family member whose name was Rashid, and they changed it to Ellis Island because they asked this young boy whose father was the town drunk, "What is your name?" And he said Ibn, which means son of the Sakran, the drunk, son of the drunk. So they spelled his name Sakran. So Frank Sacron, who is one of our most brilliant members of our family, and who's written numerous books and wrote the story, The Roots of the Rashids, was known as the Sacran family, the Sacron family.
When they got off the boat in New York, they asked people where they could go. And they showed them these mountain ranges of West Virginia. And their logic was simply, well, they couldn't have a store in every town, so it'd be the right place to go in the mountains and peddle.
George Rashid, a pioneer peddler, made his way to America in 1901 to make a better life. George was part of a family renowned for their prominent status in Syrian society, and later for their vast achievements as American citizens. George also happened to be the first Rashid to venture onto West Virginia soil.
I was working as a reporter at the newspaper in Oak Hill, Fayette Tribune, and someone had told me, I don't know how it got connected to me, but the woman who was running an international organization for leprosy was headquartered on Main Street in Oak Hill. How random is that? But as a reporter looking for an interesting story, that's one you've kind of got to do. I believe she was originally from Hawaii, and she was in southern West Virginia because her husband was a superintendent with the Park Service, or high-ranking with the Park Service, which is based in Glenjean. So, I go, do the stories, very nice woman, interesting, had a lot of interesting artifacts and interesting stories about what it was like to have leprosy, how marginalized those people were, what it meant to, what it meant to them to be shuttled off to a colony, which is, kind of an awful term for it, but, just kind of, she had a very wide-ranging spectrum of, whatever you would have about leprosy. So I do the story, I go home, and my dad said, "Did she mention your cousin?" And I said, "No, why would she mention my cousin?" She said, "Well, there's, we think the first Rashid who had come to West Virginia was a guy named George, I since learned, who suffered from leprosy. came in on the railroad and had sort of was shuttled all around the state, and apparently must have ended up, up in the Elkins area. But that was the first and last time he ever mentioned it, and he's since passed, and I regret never having questioned him a little further about that. But that was the first I'd heard of this guy.
Our entertainment when we were small was these old retired men that used to gather on the store porch down there in Pickens, and what tales they could tell. And I mean, some of them were pretty ornery, and then some of them were just entertaining. What was true and what wasn't, I don't know. And they finally brought him to Pickens because this was the farthest outpost that they had. Well, when he first came in, they put him up down below Pickens, about a mile down below Pickens, at a place that they called the Hanging Rock.
That was when Carrie's brother, Al and Sophie, was from Texas, and they was with some friends. They stayed there most of the time, and he said, "Do you know about the Leper down in Pickens?" And I said, "No." He said, "Do you want to go see it?" So we went down and looked at the grave, and the marker, and I thought, oh boy, I said, what happened?
George's case was of constant concern to the West Virginia Medical Society. In the premier edition of the West Virginia Medical Journal, Dr. Golden, Secretary of the West Virginia Medical Society, responds to Dr. Thomas Stedman's criticism in his journal. Under the heading Senseless Cowardice, you comment on the alleged ill treatment to which this leper has been and still is subjected. I'm not in a position to offer any correction to that part of your comment on the treatment which this man has received in other states, for the only source of information I have is a sensational daily press. But I am in a position to state that as far as this concerns the wilds of West Virginia, you are in error.
I was pretty young. I don't know, but I doubt if I was 10 the first time I heard the story. But it was part of the folklore of the whole family, so I've heard it more than once.
He was on his way to his far eastern home, where he hoped to end his days with his own people, but was discovered in a Maryland town, imprisoned for a time in a freight car, shipped east and then west, and finally dropped by the railway officials in a desolate region in West Virginia. Dr. Thomas Stedman's account in the journal Medical Record from August 18, 1906.
There might be 50 people
Wow.
left there.
So when the leper was there, when they brought him in, how many do you think was?
I would, just guessing, I'd say there's probably over 1,000 people.
Wow.
1,000 to 1,500, somewhere in there.
And
They were transplanted. The lumber company, Webster County, a lot of them from Webster County, Upshur County, because the B&O was the standard gauge railroad, and this was the farthest outpost that that was on the B&O. But all of the logs, like from all the surrounding areas, was brought into Pickens, as far away as Hacker Valley. They come to Pickens because they had no railroad in Hacker Valley. But from Hacker Valley, everything come to Pickens, Big Sugar Creek, Back Fork, miles and miles around, everything come to Pickens to be sold.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that they imprisoned him, so to speak. They did put a fence around it, and there's conflict as to what the fence, how it was constructed, how high it was. I think the people in Pickens were, you know, they weren't going to do a whole lot to help him because they were scared of him.